Hi, I'm Trish from TrishNewbery.com, PDF sewing patterns and tutorials, and welcome to the sew along today for the Shacket. This garment is for woven fabrics, so we're mainly going to use a plain stitch on our sewing machine, and we're also going to need a way of finishing the edge, so I'm going to use my serge overlocker. You could use a zigzag or whatever edge finish you prefer. So this is an unlined jacket. So there's two options in the neckline. They're interchangeable. You could use the hood or you could use the collar. It's a shirt collar. The hood version is much simpler than doing the shirt collar, but I'll step you through it piece by piece and we'll get started. So because this is a woven, we're using 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch seam allowances, and the fabric I'm using today, now it's a woven, it's called Melton, it's a wool blend. You could use a jacketing weight, so a lighter wool. You could use a coat weight. Now the coat weight is probably better off for the hooded version. You might find it a little bit tricky for the collared version, but just see how you go. So there's also two lengths with this. The short length just has a straight hem, that's really straightforward, I'll talk you through it. And the longer length has a stepped curve hem front and back, which is faced. So what you need to know at this stage is get all your pieces prepared and go and prepare your fuse as well. So make sure all your pieces are fused before you start, and we'll get straight into it. Now this pattern has a lot of smaller bits that add up to make the larger piece, so there's a lot of sort of things, we're going to be jumping around a bit, but just take it step by step, and the video's broken into segments and we'll do it that way. Let's work on the hood. Take the centre hood piece, and at one end you'll have 2 notches and it's wider, and at the other end it will be narrower. So place this right side up, and then take one of the hood pieces, and you'll have 2. They're a pair, sometimes people call them a mirror, one up this way and one's been cut that way. So place that right sides together like this. So the double knots show us that that's the neck area there, and we're going to sew right sides together this hood on like so. Now you have notches to match as you go, so I've just marked these with pins. And the notch here shows us the turn back position when we're going to stitch that down. But for now, we're going to match the notches and stitch that seam with a 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now I'm struggling a bit with COVID to get thread colours to match my fabric, so hopefully this will be good enough. Okay, so now you can either go to your overlocker and serge finish that edge, or sew the other side on and do them both together. So I'll do the other side. So we're going to take the other side, place it right sides together, and do exactly the same thing. Now with that curve, unless your cutting is absolutely perfect, it's really easy to end up with a teeny bit of excess fabric. So make sure you cut and sew accurately. So go ahead and overlock serge those raw edges. I've only used a 3 thread, you could use a 4 thread if you want, but 3 thread is perfectly fine. There's no need to trim any fabric off as you sew. Now I won't videotape myself doing the serging because this is going to be quite a long video anyway. So partway along you'll see a notch, and that will show us, so partway along from the straight edge you'll see a notch, and the notch is top and bottom here, and that shows us the turn back position for this hood. What I'd like you to do is to tidy up this edge here. So if you're using a serger, serge this edge. If you're using a zigzag, you could zigzag, or if you don't want that finish, what you could do is just do a narrow hem. So you could do 5mm, quarter of an inch turn back, and then turn it that notch again. So long story short, what we're going to be doing is, once you've tidied that edge, we're going to our iron and we're going to memory press that hem into place before we secure the edge here. Okay, so here you can see that I've pressed in the hems on that straight edge. Now this fabric, I'm going to do some top stitching. I'm going to top stitch the side hood to the centre hood, so all of this bulk is going to be towards the centre. Now you don't have to do this if your fabric is lighter, you might prefer not to. I do think it's a really nice design feature, so I'm going to stitch on this side and this side. Make sure that you've test stitched your fabric on, well, your machine on spare pieces of fabric before you begin. We're going to stitch through all the bulk. Now I'm going to use foot width, which is near enough to quarter an inch. You can do whatever width you like, but whatever width you choose, try and keep it consistent through the whole garment. There's no need to back tack, but do try and start as far towards the edge as you can. And when you've done one side, do the other side. Same thing, push all that bulk towards the centre. Okay, so you can see here I haven't quite, when I've sewn that curve on, I haven't quite got to the edge. That's only about 3 or 4mm, so what I'm going to do is, when the stitch line is here, I'll just make sure it's at the correct space. I'll angle it up, so I won't cut that off. So it's really important, don't cut it off if you make a small mistake, and that's not worth restitching for. So pop away your hood somewhere safe and we can move on. If you're sewing the shirt collar view, I'm just going to pop into this video my standard technique for sewing a shirt collar. It's really easy to see because the fabric's white, the thread is dark, as well as that, the only thing you have to be aware of, I have put on the video, is that just top stitch the top collar at whatever top stitching width you choose. So I've suggested 6mm, quarter of an inch. So if you're sewing the shirt collar view, go ahead, complete that now, and then put that aside somewhere safe, and we'll move on to the body of the garment. The piece of collar fall that you fused becomes the top collar. Place that right sides together, and we're going to sew a 6mm seam around the outside 3 sides to create this pattern piece. So that's a 1/4 inch. Make sure you sew this very smoothly and you get right into those corners accurately. If you need to, stitch a 1/4 or a 1/2 stitch. This is a bag out piece, which is why it's been patterned at 6mm. It doesn't matter whether you sew this from the fuse side up or the under collar side up, whatever you feel more comfortable with. Clip the corners with your shears. If you need to, just refer to the website article on clipping corners. And then we're going to use our standard corner turning technique to bag this out. Make sure you do leave a gap between the stitching and the cut line.
Make sure you push both of those corners out into nice points and do not be tempted to use anything to help push those out. Now we're going to do some top stitching, and we always top stitch from the right side or the top collar side. So go ahead and complete an edge stitch on the 3 sides. Make sure when you stitch that you've fully pushed that seam out. Now we're going to work on the collar stand. Place the fused piece right side up and the fall piece that's fused right side down. We want the fused pieces to be against each other. Now place the other stand piece right side down. We've created a sandwich. Turn this over and finger press a 1 centimeter seam on the long straight edge. We're going to sew a 6 millimeter seam from that fold around the curved edges, and we want to make sure that the start of that fall piece touches the notch and that the notches of both of the stand pieces are on top of each other. So when you're ready, stitch a 6 mil or 1/4 inch seam, making sure our raw edges are even the entire time we sew. So you may need to stop with your needle down and rearrange your work. Don't forget when you get to the other end to make sure that that notch is sitting on top of the other notch and that 1 centimeter seam is turned over. So you will stop stitching on the edge of that fold. There's generally no need to ever cut notches here or wedges out, but if your fabric is especially bulky, you may need to. So turn that collar through and place it somewhere safe.
Let's start with sewing the patch pockets, the front pockets, onto the front of the garment. So you have 2 pockets. What I'd like you to do is at the edge that's closest to the notch, overlock, secure that edge or zigzag it or whatever you're going to do. So from now on I'll just refer to it as serging overlocking. So we just want to do that edge there, and then go to your iron and press this to the wrong side like so, and while you're there, so that's at the notch position there, and while you're there press in the other 3 seams by 1 centimeter 3/8 of an inch. Okay, so the reason we memory press these other seams in is just to make it a little bit easier when we go to attach the pocket. So let's sew down the pocket top. So turn the pocket top to the wrong side and sew a line of stitching directly through that overlocking line. And I'm going to do mine from the right side. So just stitch it from side to side. Make sure it's nice and even. And when you've finished that, sew a second line of stitching parallel to the first on the upper side. Okay, and don't forget to do that with the other pattern piece as well. So put those pocket bag pieces away somewhere safe, and we'll work on these pocket flaps. Now, if you just want to use the pocket bags by themselves, that's fine, absolutely fine. If you want to have the flaps, now we need to move on. If your fabric is light, you might choose to fuse one of these pieces. It's not absolutely necessary, but you could if you feel your fabric's not firm enough. So we have 2 pairs of these. Place them right sides together, and we're going to sew around 3 sides of them, and we want to leave this long straight edge free. and because it's going to be what's called a bag out, I'm going to sew at 6mm, 1/4 inch seam allowances. It'll just stop us needing to trim so much. Okay, trim those edges off and turn through. And we're going to top stitch, so if you have a side that looks better, and choose that now, or if you have fuse, the fuse will be the outside. And I'm going to top stitch at 5mm again, 1/4 inch, just around those 3 sides. I tend to press afterwards. So there we have it, and don't forget to do the same thing on the other one. Now in the pattern I haven't allowed for it, but if you wanted to put buttons and buttonholes here, absolutely fine. What I suggest you do is sew a test buttonhole on spare fabric, and then you'll want to put the buttonhole on this piece here now, this way, so parallel to the straight edge, maybe 1.5 centimeters, no, maybe 3/4 inch, maybe more, up from this center point here. So you want it parallel like that, and it's easier to do it now than it is to do later. You can certainly adjust the button position. Let's sew the pocket to the front. So take one of the fronts, place it right side up, and find the drill mark. So that's the position for our pocket, and take the pocket bag and place it so that it's right side up, so we have wrong side to right side. Okay, so the drill marks are positioned at 1 centimeter, 3/8 inch. So what that means is, go to the finished corner of your pocket, and remember we've finger pressed it down, and you estimate a position 1 centimeter in and 1 centimeter down, so that's 3/8 inch there, and that position there should fit, or should be put directly on top of that drill hole there. And do the same thing on the other side. There's our finished pocket, 1 in, 1 down, 3/8 in, 3/8 down, put a pin there. That pin should cover directly, or should go directly on top of that position there. Now because fabric moves around when we're marking and doing things like that, oh, it's a bit tight to get through. Sometimes these positions won't be absolutely perfect, and that's fine. What we're looking for is pretty good. What I mean by that is we want to make sure, because this is a straight front here, oh, sorry about the noise, I'm on a main road to an airport and a sub road to a port, so it's always noisy here, so sorry about that. So what we want to do is, the first thing we need to do is make sure that both drill holes are covered. You've got a fair bit of room there. The next thing is we want to make sure that this edge here is parallel to this edge here when we're finished, because it'll make it look really nice. Obviously this fabric's quite firm and hasn't tucked under properly. So when you've got the top sitting nice and flat, I'll pin it in from the middle, it might be easier. Just make sure the rest of the pocket sits nice and flat as well. It's more important that the pocket sits flat than it's in where your marks are. Your marks might have moved. Nice and flat. So now we're going to sew around the 3 sides here, starting from the armhole side. Because I'm putting a flap on this, I'm just going to back tack the top. Normally I'd do a nice little triangle finish or something in up there, but there's no need to, it will be hidden. So just start in and do a back tack, and for this pocket I'm going to edge stitch around it, so it's not far from the edge, it's literally a pin width, 1 or 2 millimeters, and I'm just using my presser foot as a guide. When I sew this pocket in, I'm going to do the sides under and the bottom up, so the side goes under and then the bottom goes up afterwards. So just take your time and sew that on. Stop with the needle down in your work, lift, turn and pivot and rearrange. Okay, so we have the pocket bag stitched into place. Now let's sew the pocket flap. Take the flap and make sure you know which is the right side, so the side you want out. So if that was fused, that would be outside. Place it on top of the pocket so it looks like it's going to be finished. And when you've got the right pocket flap, just turn it over. So now we have right sides together. Now this pocket flap's wider than the pocket bag by about 5mm, 1/4 inch, but that might have changed for you while you've been sewing. So what we're looking for now is we want to leave a 5mm, 1/4 inch gap here and a 5mm, 1/4 inch gap at either end. Now if you don't have it, just make sure it's the same amount at each end. And just eyeball this gap here, make sure it's parallel. And when you're ready, we're going to sew a 1 cm 3/8 of an inch seam to secure that in place. So this is what we're looking for, like this. Now we're going to turn this back on itself and stitch it down. So this fabric is quite dense. I must admit, when I was doing this video, I sort of thought I'd do the version without the flap, but it's probably easier to show you the version with the flap. And I have got a heavier needle in here. Okay, so turn that over on itself and stitch this down. Now, because I want to hide this raw edge here, I'm going to do this. It's not a centimetre and it's not 5mm, so it's maybe 7mm. So this is over 1/4 inch. Just to make it tidy, but you can choose to stitch that whatever you'd like. It's going to be a bit bulky depending on the fabric you choose. And I broke a needle. Whoops. Whoops, okay, well, I'll change my needle now. Obviously it wasn't quite heavy enough, and I'll be right back. So what I've done is just put a really heavy duty needle in there. Sorry about that, I did find that quite funny. And I've continued stitching through. So when you're finished, this is what it will look like. So you should be able to lift this up and still get your hand in there. And go ahead and repeat that for the other side of the front. We're now going to sew the side seam pocket to each side of the front. First thing you need to do is locate the 3 notches at the side seam. So this is for view A. What we're going to do is, so the top notch here will show us the top of the pocket, the notch here, the middle notch shows us the bottom of the pocket, and this last notch here shows us the top of the split. What we need to do now is go to our serger and just serge to secure the area between the second and lowest notch. So go to your serger and serge from maybe 2 inches above the middle notch all the way down here to 2 inches below the lower notch, and do that for both sides of the front. Okay, so this is what it's going to look like here. Now the reason we're doing this is because the seam above the pocket or at the pocket is closed, the seam below the pocket is open on view A. That will make sense shortly. So take one of your side seam pockets and place it so that it is right side together to the side seam, and make sure it's facing downwards, and match those notch positions at notch 1 and 2. And I'm just going to remove the pin for 3. Okay, so what we're going to do is sew the seam from the first notch position here at 1 cm 3/8 of an inch, and we're going to stop at the second notch position. to back tack. And now we're going to snip into that downwards. So we need to, downwards at the bottom and upwards at the top. So we're going to snip in and up to the start position, and then in and down to the finish position. Don't cut through your fabric, so that's what we're looking for. Go ahead and repeat that on the other side. Now open that pocket up and making sure all the bulk is on the side of the pocket. Stitch as an edge stitch, so some people call this under stitching, I call it pin stitching. So we're going to stitch just from the notch beginning to the notch down the bottom. We just want to create a roll here. Like so. And repeat that on the other side. So go to your iron and give those pockets a press. So normally I'd start now on the centre front, but I'm just going to jump that for the time being and put it aside, and we'll start on the back. Take your back piece, it's actually the lower back because we have a yoke, and place it right sides together. Now I have patterned this as a fold. If you don't have the fabric, you certainly could cut it as a pair, just add a seam allowance and sew it together. Through the centre back there's a pleat, so let's come to this upper straight edge and you'll see two notches, so match those notches together. So here's our fold, and just below the notches you'll see a drill hole here. So what we're going to do is stitch from the notch here to 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch past that drill hole to create the pleat. Don't forget to back tack. There we are. So that's what we're looking for. And now what we're going to do is push it like that. So we want the very centre of the back to now sit on top. So we're creating a pleat like so. If it was the other way around it would be a box pleat, but I'm doing it this way, so it's called an inverted pleat. And just to help hold it into position, I'm going to tack stitch it down through the seam allowance. I'm literally just going to hold it together and making sure it's all nice and even. And now I'm going to go and give that a press, and I'm just going to press the upper part. If you're sewing side seam pockets, we're going to do exactly the same thing we did on the front. Come to the side seam, so here's our armhole, and find the 3 notches, 1, 2, 3. And we want to overlock secure from about 2 inches, 5 centimetres above notch number 2 to the same distance below notch number 3, and we'll do that on both sides. Okay, so here's notch 1, 2 and 3, and I've secured the edge here. Then place your pocket right side down, match notches 1 and 2 and stitch between them just like we did with the front. We're going to do exactly the same. We're going to stitch through the notches at 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch from notch to notch. Do that for both sides. And then snip through them just like we did before. Take your back, place it right side up, take your yoke, place it right side down so we have right sides together, and we're going to sew this long straight edge. You want the center notch to match to the center of the pleat. And when you're finished, we're going to serge tidy that edge. Now we're going to top stitch this, so place it right side up, and we want to top stitch this on the lower side, not the upper side, so make sure all that bulk is facing towards the hem, and top stitch at 6mm, 1/4 of an inch. Now we're going to work on the front button placket. So you have two pieces that look like this, they're long and narrow, and you should have fused them. So we're going to do a memory press again with our iron. It doesn't matter which side you choose, but we're going to press the opposite. So if you press this side, you need to press this side, or if you press this side, you need to press this side. So what are we going to do? Choose one of the long edges and press it under by 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch here, and then do the opposite side and do the same to that one, and press it all the way, bent pin, from the top to the bottom. Right, so here is one of the pieces that I memory pressed one side into. As you can tell, it's thick, so it's not holding particularly well, but it will help us. So take one of the front pieces, place it right side up, and match to it right sides together one of the center front placket pieces, and we want the side that is not pressed, and we want the scalloped side at the top and the flat end at the bottom. And you'll know you'll have the right piece because part way down the notches will match. So we want, you've got a 50-50 chance of getting this right, so we want the piece that you the side that you have not pressed, right sides together with the scalloped edge at the top. And what we're going to do is stitch that together with a 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now before we can go any further with the front, we actually have to stitch in the front hem facing to it. So take your two front hem facing pieces, and they'll be curved at one end and straight at the other. And what we're going to do is go to your serge overlocker or zigzag, whatever you're using, and we want to zigzag this inside curve, so the inside curve for both of these pieces. Okay, so this is what we want, and we haven't cut anything off as we've tidied them, we've just tidied off the edge. So to find the correct piece, just come to that edge like so, right out to the edge, and we want the piece that right sides together fits like this. So the straight edge will be down here and the curved edge will be up here by the pocket. So when you have the correct piece, bring this straight edge over and match it to the lower front. So here's our memory pressed 1 centimetre hem here, and just stitch that to the lower front by 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch, just from the overlocking down to the lower edge like that. So don't forget to go and do the other side. And now what I'm going to do is go to your iron and press this placket, and we want to press it so all the bulk faces towards the placket. So after you've pressed that, fold this back on itself so all those seams match, and you'll find there's a notch right in the centre of the bottom. And we want all those seams to face in towards the placket, so we want all the bulk like that. And we're going to sew a 1 centimetre seam from the fold all the way around to the first notch. Don't go further than the first notch at this stage. I mean, you could, but it'll come clearer later why it's not a good idea. So we're going to sew that like so. Sew that like so, okay. Actually, I might sew mine the other way around. The bulkier your fabric, the harder this will be. So the next step is to press this through the centre, so press it from the centre notch through to the bottom. What that will do is, if you press it correctly, we want to sort of press it so that it's all sandwiched in like this, and eventually we'll be stitching that down like so. Now it's time to sew what looks like the shoulders but is actually just the forward yoke, because our shoulder position is marked by the notch here and here at the underarm, but for all intents and purposes it does look like the shoulders. So we're going to take our back and our fronts and match them right sides together, and we're going to sew across at 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch. And then we're going to serge tidy that seam. We're going to top stitch this, and we want to top stitch this on the front side, so make sure the bulk of the seam faces down towards the front, and just edge stitch that at top stitch that at 6mm, 1/4 inch, or whatever you've been using. And do it on both sides. Now we're going to work on inserting the hood to the neckline. So one thing we haven't done yet is to top stitch our collar hem into place. So stitch a line of stitching through this overlocking line at the centre front. And then if you'd like to sew a second line of stitching, go ahead. Now I sewed mine just to the side of the overlocking line, so I'm going to put mine on this side. You could choose whichever side you want to. Come to the neckline of the body of the garment and find the notch at the centre back, and then the notches either side of it. So to sew in the hood, match the notches at the centre of the hood to the centre back here. Then you'll see a notch in on the side panel, and that matches to the notch here. And the same on the other side. Once you have those main notches in place, what you will find is if you come around here to the centre front, this fold of the hood should match exactly to the centre of the fold that we pressed in earlier. So now it's just a matter of stitching this into place. Now you can see I've just tacked that into place to start with, because what I'm going to do is bring this over like so. What that's going to do is give me a really nice transition at the centre front. And stitching it down just helps me butt it into place. Coming through to the other side, I'm going to do exactly what we did before in reverse. I'm not going to tack stitch hold this, I'll just hold that with my hands. So I'm placing the fold here against the fold that we pressed in the centre, and I might just hand crank over this just in case, because this is quite bulky. So now what we need to do is overlock tidy that raw edge. So there's my edge tidied, and we just turn this through at the front. And hopefully if you've done it right, that seam there should line up with that. Mine's a teeny bit out. It's not terrible given the bulk of the fabric. Same on that side. I haven't buttered that completely over because of the bulk of the fabric, but it's not terrible. And when it's being worn, it'll still look really tidy. Okay. I'm going to sew the button placket, the front centre placket down. So if you remember, we're at this stage here, so this is the hood view. When we sew it down, what we're aiming on doing is covering the existing line of stitching. So because we have a 1 centimetre seam allowance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch at foot width, which means this fold here will cover the existing line of stitching, but the stitch line, when you see it, will sit in here. Now I'm going to sew this from the hem, and I'm going to sew it from the right side so I can keep a really good eye on what I'm doing. So what I tend to do this is I put a pin through the side, and I try and catch just the edge like so. So it's a bit like stitch in the ditch, that we want to make sure that this is covered. And because we're sewing at 6mm, 1/4 inch, I mean you could sew it right on the edge if you wanted to, we have got quite a bit of leeway. But if you do that, it just sort of helps you a bit from it moving out. So what I'm going to do is I'm starting at the hem. This is quite bulky. I might just start in from the hem and go backwards. I must admit, when I started cutting out this fabric, I knew it was going to be a little bit bulkier than the previous samples I'd done, but I had underestimated just how bulky this would be. So I will put in the notes, do not use coating weights, and this is definitely a coating weight fabric. Let's see if I can go backwards. Just a bit concerned about the thickness. Oh no, it's going through okay. Okay, so we'll go forwards now. The other samples I've sewn this in were more jacketing weights and also a brushed acrylic, which worked really well. So I did think this melted would be fine. In hindsight, not a good idea, but I'm so far through on this video now, we'll just keep going. So I'm going to stitch this at foot width, which is around about 1/4 of an inch. Made it. Okay, so stitch that down, give it a good press, and do the same thing on the other side. Sewing the placket for view B is slightly different from view A. Take the front placket, and at one edge it'll be slightly curved, and at the other edge it will be flat. So press a seam, a hem under by 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch on the opposite side for both. So it doesn't matter which one, either do those two or those two. Alright, now we're going to attach this to the front of the garment. This is the right front of the garment as you wear it, and it's right side up. Part way down you'll see a notch. Now take one of those pieces that you just pressed a hem under and match it right sides together, and we want the unpressed edge, and just match that with the curved, the shaped side at the neckline, and as you come down the notch will match. Now this placket piece is shorter than the front we're sewing it to, so just bear that in mind. So what we're going to do, stitch this from the neckline down 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch. So there'll be a small notch here on the front that this raw edge of the placket will match to. Okay, so when you've done that on both sides, we're going to do this. Next step, we're just going to sew a small bag out here. So what that means is push all of that bulk towards the placket and then just fold this. There will be a notch here and the fold of the seam allowance will be there, and we want to sew across at 1 centimetre. Like so. So again, I'll show you on the other side. Fold under that like so, match it to the line here, the seam line, and then just make sure all that bulk is facing towards the placket, and then sew that across at 1 centimetre. And stop at fold. Okay, now what I'd like you to do is overlock secure this raw hem at the bottom before we do the placket. Time to sew on the collar. So this is the left front neckline as I'm wearing it, and in the centre here there's a notch. So at the centre of the placket here we want to match this extended edge, not the folded edge, of the collar. So pop a pin there and hold it into place. And now it's just a matter of matching our pins as we go around. Matter of matching our notch positions as we sew around. So match your centre back and the other notches you have on your collar. Now this is a really bad example, I'm sorry, because of the fabric. This is frayed. It's frayed significantly and it has stretched quite a lot. So when you're ready, we're going to, so this is the folded edge here, this is the side I've fused. So just make sure that when you start, you're right in the centre on that notch position. And stitch that around. Okay, so this should be starting to look like it's coming together now. If you push this over like so, then you can see how, just like our cuff, that collar's going to be stitched down like so. So what we're going to do now is stitch down the placket, so match this edge here to the seam line here. And I'm going to stitch mine, I'm just going to do this slowly, but I'm going to stitch mine from the front. And I'm going to stitch this, so it will be over here at 5mm, 1/4 of an inch, and when you get to the bottom, just make sure you push that out like so. Our next step is to stitch down the button placket, so that folded edge, it's a bit like stitching the ditch, just like for view A, needs to match to the stitch line there. And we're going to stitch that at 6mm, 1/4 of an inch. Now I'm going to do mine from the right side, and I'm just going to go away and pin it all, just to make sure it's all nice and tidy. Okay, so this was fraying so much. What I've done is I've just hand tack stitched that into place instead of pinning it. So now I will put that top stitch in. So you can start at the bottom or the top, whatever you prefer. And I'm going to stitch this at 6mm, 1/4 of an inch. So stop it just as you get to that neckline edge. Okay, so there's the placket on one side done. Just make sure that's all going to tuck over nicely when we sew that in shortly. Just make sure it all fits properly, and then go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. Right, time to sew in the collar. Now the reason I sewed it this way is because when the collar is being worn, this is the side you're going to see, and I always think it's easier if you sew it the side you want to see. So come to the inside of the top, and here is that fold. So all you're doing now is folding this over, and we're going to stitch this down. And when we stitch it, what we want to do is our line of stitching needs to be pinward in from the edge, so it's 1 or 2 millimeters, and that line of stitching you want to be sitting exactly on top of the stitching on the other side. So some people would prefer to hand sew this. All I can say to you is just pin it into place and match the pin positions, whoops, as you go, and it is actually easier than you think. So if you pin it and take your time. Now, because this fabric has been, or is really fray-y, don't even think that's a word, I'm actually going to hand tack that all before I sew it in with my machine. So I've tack stitched this into place. What I'm going to do is stitch, and when I stitch here, I'm hoping that it'll exactly be an edge stitch on that side too. Yep, that looks pretty good. So I'll just do a little bit of quality control thread snipping. Let's start on the sleeve. So place one of your sleeve pieces right side up. You'll have a pair, one's been cut like this, one's been cut like this. And across one side you'll have a slash, which is 10 centimeters long, 4 inches. And one side of the slash, the larger size, you will have 4 notches. So these are our pleats. The pleats need to face towards the slash. So right side up. Pick up the first pleat, pinch it, and place it on top of the second pleat. And then tack stitch that into place through the seam allowance, so around about 6 mil. Now pick up pleat notch 3, pinch it, put it on top of notch 4, now repeat the same thing on the other side. Place this right side up, and what you'll find is it's in reverse. The pleats still need to face towards the slash, towards the shorter side. So we're going to pick up this pleat here, so notch, I'm not going to call them numbers because it'll get confusing, but this one here needs to be pinched and put on this one here. And tack that into place, and then pick this one here up, pinch it, and put it on this one here. So our pleats are facing towards the slash. We have 2 sleeve plackets, which is basically just going to act like bias tape to cover the slash area here. Now some people find it easier to press one of these sides under to the wrong side by 1 centimeter, 3/8 of an inch first. So I'll do that first, and you can choose whether you like to do that for the second one. I'll show you how to do it. So I've pressed one of these to the wrong side, so turn that over so that we have right side up. And then take your sleeve and place it right side up as well. So what we're going to do is have wrong side to right side, and I want this edge to be on the edge that does not have that 1 centimetre press. So just match that like so. What we're going to do is angle this out as we sew. So effectively we're going to sew in a straight line, but we want to sew from there to here. So the whole time we're maintaining a 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch seam allowance on the bottom placket, but we'll be angling out the front. And the easiest way is just to show you. And you could use bias tape if this is confusing for you. So just start with those 2 pieces matching at that 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Just sew a couple of stitches just to hold that in place. Then at the very top of the slash there needs to be 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch from there to there. When you have that in place, sew exactly along to that point. 1 centimetre. As you can see, we've sort of created a bit of a triangle. We want to go right to the very top of that slash, and then we stop with the needle down. Now we just want to lift the foot presser up and rearrange our work. And we're doing everything we've just done in reverse, all the way back to the beginning again. Maintaining that 1 centimetre all the way through. Now, bring that over and around. So we're just going to cover what we've done. So it's just the same as using bias tape. And I'm going to stitch that over. So as I've rolled this, what I've done is created a placket. And I'm going to edge stitch this into place. And if you've pre-pressed that 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch memory hem in, this makes it really easy. You just bring it over the top of that stitching and edge stitch it down, just like bias binding tape. We're stitching it from the right side so we can see what we're doing, and it'll end up really tidy. Okay, so the next thing you need to do is the side that has the pleats on it, tuck that bias under and just tack stitch that into place. And do that on both sides. What's going to happen is this will come over and hide that like so at our cuff, but we just need to make sure we have the right side tucked under. Now if you have a little bit like this left over, that's perfectly fine. If you haven't trimmed it, just tidy it back up, make sure it's all nice and straight. It'll help when we're sewing the cuff on. Okay, so that's the other side done. So what's going to happen is it's going to be like this, and yes, this fabric is a bit thick. And it's a really good idea now to fold that the way it's going to end up sitting, so that is on top of each other, and then just come up to this end here inside, just sew a teeny, you see this line here, we're just going to sew a teeny little straight line just to maintain that triangle. I'll just help it sitting nicely on the inside of the garment. And don't forget to do that on the other side as well, so that's what it'll look like. Now we're going to put the sleeve into the garment. Please ignore the fact I serged the edges. I've decided there's a better way of constructing this. So just take your sleeve and place it right side together to the armhole of the garment. Now We're going to match this. There are notches to match, so if we look, here's the front and here's the back. On the back of the sleeve there are double notches, and we want to make sure that the double notches on the sleeve match the double notch on the garment. We also have a notch in the centre which is going to match to the notch just off the centre of the yoke. And there is another notch to match on the front of the garment. So there is a small amount of ease. When you do sew this together, you'll find the ease is between the notches, so it's closer towards the sleeve head. So what we're going to do is, as I mentioned, right sides together. Sew that seam at 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch, and then serge, tidy that edge when you're finished. And don't forget to repeat that on the other side. So it's up to you if you'd like to sew some top stitching on the sleeve. I'm going to push all of the seam allowance towards the sleeve. So here's the sleeve and here's the body of the garment, and I'm just going to stitch that at 6mm, 1/4 of an inch. And don't forget to do that on the other side. Side seam pocket time. So place your garment right sides together and match the side seams and the underarm and the sleeves. And then bring the pockets through to the front, so they're both sitting towards the front. We are going to sew the pocket curve in at 1 centimetre and then overlock, tidy that raw edge. It's a little bit awkward because of the bulk. You do have a double notch to match. So this is what we're looking for, and don't forget to repeat that on the other side. Now we're sewing the side seams and the underarm, and I'm going to sew this from the hem up towards the underarm and then the wrist, just because I'm hoping it'll be easier for you to see. So bring the pocket through to the front. It should be sitting against the front, and just make sure all those bits we snipped are just sitting out, and find the notch. Remember earlier we overlocked to 2 inches past the notch, so find that notch at the bottom part of the garment. So that is our start point, and we're going to stitch this together with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. So just back tack at that notch, come up, and then stitch all the way up till you meet the stitching here at the notch on the pocket. So we're not actually going that far, just come up to that point there and then back tack and stop. So we're stopping here. Then we're going to leave this area free, come up to the upper side of the pocket, same thing again, make sure all those snipped bits are pushed out, and we're just going to overlap our stitching slightly at that notch position, back tack it, and continue stitching. And now just continue stitching up through the underarm and back to the wrist. Now your underarm won't be overlocked. It's just a mistake I made earlier. Well, not a mistake, I just decided to change the construction. So backtack at the wrist area. And now go to your overlocker, and we want to finish the seam off from the bottom of the pocket, so that's where the other overlocking starts. So we want to start here, just serge on right through to the wrist area, and then repeat the same thing on the other side. For view B, the side seam and side seam pockets, it's just slightly different because we have a straight hem. So fold your garment right side together and stitch from the wrist down through the underarm, and now I'm coming in the side seam. I'm just above the pocket, and if you just need some refreshment, you can look at view B for that, view A for that. So I'm coming down towards the pocket, so I've put the side seam pockets towards the front, and I'm sewing down. And just like view A, I'm going to stitch down until I'm opposite that notch. Now I'm going to leave that room there for the gap to be my hand, and I'm going to come down and start again at the notch there, and this time we're stitching all the way through to the hem. So go through to the hem in a straight line, like so, and now just overlock that entire seam from wrist right through to hem. And don't forget to repeat on the other side. Once you've gone and serged that edge, go ahead and attach your cuffs the same way as view A. Let's work on the cuff. You should have fused it already. So go to one of the long edges and turn that under by 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. And then we're going to fold this in half lengthwise, and fold it so that the notch is at the fold. So we're going to leave a space like this and just stitch 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch seam from that fold towards the pressed fold on the other side. So we don't need to stitch all the way to the end, just stitch to here, and then turn it round and do it on the other side as well. And don't forget, we've got 2 of these, so you'll need to do it for the other cuff as well. Now turn this through and push the corners out. To sew the cuff to the sleeve wrist area, now there's different ways of doing it, and it's really personal preference. You can sew it like this, so this is the right side of the sleeve, and if we stitch this way, then when you finish you'll be top stitching here. Or if you want to, and it's a little bit more awkward, you can sew it this way. You just have to be careful you don't catch that, but when it's finished you'll be top stitching like that. So it's really up to you. Some people swear one way is right, some people swear the other's way is right. It is, I find, easier to do it like this. It's just a little bit less awkward. So what we've got is this raw edge against the raw edge here, so it's right sides together, and we're just going to match the ends there, and we're going to sew it in a 1 centimetre seam. Now this is a little bit awkward because of the bulk. Just roll that out and save a tad of the bulk. Okay, so sew that at 1 centimetre. Make sure your pleats just sit nice and flat when you run over them. And at the very end it should, because this edge is the side we twisted under, it should all be perfect. So now we tuck all that in, like so, and we stitch it down. Now we're going to secure this fold here, hold it under with pins if you need to, and I'm going to stitch mine at foot width. Sometimes it's not a good idea to start from a corner. I'm going to just start here. You can go around all four sides. You can just go around the edge that attaches to the cuff if you want to. Whatever you like to do, it's up to you. So when you go to stitch the button and the buttonhole on, and you can do that now if you want, the side that is the side with the pleats goes on top, so that's the buttonhole side, and the side underneath where you can actually see your binding is the side for the button. The buttonhole runs this way, just to allow you to have a bit of movement, so it's parallel to this edge here. Time to work on the facing. Find your back hem facing, and that's the one that's been cut on the fold, and serge tidy the inside curve. Okay, so whatever edge method you prefer. Now come to the hemline of your garment, and if you remember at the hemline here we've partially stitched on the front hem facing, so find the one here that's this curve, and then come to the one here that's this curve, and we're going to sew them together. So we sew them together, right sides together like this, and all we're going to do is stitch from this raw edge down to the notch here, so 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and just stitch that short distance there. Now it's a good idea to press that open, which means that, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sewing that to here very shortly. But once you've sewn that one on that side, be careful not to twist what you're working with. And sew the same on the other side. So it's a very short distance. Come to the facing at the centre front, and you remember we stitched around to the first notch, so that's where we're going to continue stitching from. So just overrun your stitches by just a couple, and then start stitching again. So there'll be notches to match as you go, and you should be able to see them through the fuse. Now as we approach the side seam, but all you need to worry about for now is that we're going to stitch to one side and stop opposite the notch. So that whole time we only want to be stitching through 2 layers of fabric. And then when we start again on the other side, and sometimes it's a good idea to do it from this direction. I'll just trim off that stray thread there. You want to stitch up exactly the same. Now I'm doing this in reverse, you normally wouldn't, but this is a really good way of just making sure that that split's going to be perfect. So on both sides we're only stitching through 2 layers, but when we're finished, above that notch is going to be pressed open on both sides. So you'll just end up with a perfect transition there. Okay, so once you've done that there, let's just continue around. So the reason I sort of did that backwards is just sometimes things can get a little bit pushed out of place, and if you just make sure it's perfect at the top, you can sort of join it up later. It's something you sort of have to do to work with, to know. So continue around and match all your notches as you go. That's really important to make sure we don't end up with any twisting. Now we're going to do some pin stitching, some people call it understitching, to help create roll. Come to the lower centre front. Now get as close as you can. It'll probably only be 2 inches, 1.5 inches, which is like maybe 4 or 5 centimetres. But just keep a note of how far out you start, because that's how far out you want to finish on the other side, just to keep it all consistent. So we're stitching through the bulk of the fabric, so put all the fabric seam on that side, and we want to stitch on the facing side, and we're sewing at pin width from the seam just to help create roll. Alright, so go to your iron and press that with that fold on the edge. As you can see, that's already starting to roll to the inside. So just give that a press and then we'll top stitch that into place. Now it's time to top stitch our facing into place. You can top stitch it from the wrong side through the overlocking line, you can follow the curve, you can just top stitch whatever way you prefer. What I'm going to do is, I'll check the widths, but I'm pretty sure that this is 4 centimeters wide, and I'll put that conversion down. So I'm going to start directly on the seam line, and I'm going to sew parallel. And you might find it easier, as I said, if you're working on it from the wrong side, but I'm sewing exactly parallel to the outside seam. Now I can actually see the seam here, as well as that. I'm just feeling for it as I go, just to make sure I don't miss it. And I'm just taking my time. Now when you get up towards the side seam, the facing's a curve. Now you could follow the curve around. I like to just do mine straight, so what I'm going to do is come up until I'm directly opposite the top of the split, and I like to just do a right turn and stitch straight across right at the top just to reinforce it. And remember, those seams underneath should be open. And I'm going to continue stitching. We're working on view B hem, so when we did that little bag out of the placket at the centre front, it actually showed us the turn position of the hemline. So the hem I have marked here is 2.5 centimetres, which is an inch. So you could press that and then stitch it into place. I'm just going to stitch that into place and press it afterwards. And I'm going to start and I'm going to sew through my overlocking line. Normally I stitch these from the front. You could do it from the front or the back, whichever you prefer. Now the side seams normally will face towards the back, but because we have the pockets, they're going to face towards the front. Right, so go and give your hem a press and you're finished. On a final note, if you are doing side seam pockets in view B, you may find that they hang down quite low. The easiest thing to do is just to pin the bottom of the pocket where it sits, and then just run a couple of tack stitches through the hemline just to hold that pocket in place. So you'd be stitching through the existing stitching here, just a couple forward, back. That's just because of the angle, they may just hang down lower, and that's a quick fix for that. So just another note about the short jacket, so the view B version. I haven't put it in the pattern, but if you wanted to, what I've done is I've made this collar stand wide enough to put another button and buttonhole on it, if that's the look you want, if you really want to go for like a high button, almost like a denim jacket look. You could put another button and buttonhole in this area here, so just allow an extra button for that. Also view B probably is better off sewn without the side seam pockets, because I've sewn a couple of these short versions now and the side seam pockets do need to be tacked into place. So if you really want side seam pockets, pop them in, but just be aware of that view B probably is better off without them. That's just a judgment call for you. So that's it. Apart from button and buttonholes, we're finished, and all that information is detailed in the construction sequence. Thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoy this pattern. It is going to be a bit of a labour of love. I hope you really enjoy it. It's a great combination of the grunge, city chic, cool. You can dress it up, you can dress it down. It's one of those really versatile things depending on the fabric and your accessories. Hope to see you again soon, and thanks for buying my patterns.